Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So today I have a special guest on my channel. We have Nissen. He is a Maryland University medical graduate, and he's here today to answer all of the pre-medical questions that you guys are always asking me, and also here to give us some tips on how to master getting into medical school. So Nick, would you like to do a little introduction about yourself?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Krista. It's so great to be on your show and to help to answer some questions for pre-meds. It is a difficult path, and it's something that requires a lot of good strategy. So I'm hopeful I can lend some help here. So like you said, my name's Nick Nissen. I'm the founder of medicalschoolapplications.com and wrote the book, The Physician's Guide, which all of the work that I do is all centered around how to help pre-meds to be more successful, and to basically to show you how to find exactly the things that you're interested in and how to really spend your time, your extracurriculars, and your extra efforts as a pre-med to build up those interests to make you into a more competitive applicant and get into more medical schools.
Okay, that's awesome. I'm really excited. Okay, so I've sent Nick over all the questions that you guys are always asking me, the frequently asked ones, and he's gonna try to just gear the conversation a little bit better than I can. I really only know what I've heard. He's gonna be the expert here, so let's go ahead and jump into a couple of these questions.
So the first question that you are getting from your audience is, do you have any tips or strategies you use to effectively remember the material for the test as well as for the future? So in that question, I assume when they're talking about the test, they're talking about the MCAT, but otherwise, it really applies for all tests that you're taking.
Yeah.
And it is so important to develop these skills because for the rest of your career, as a doctor, I have two tests I'm preparing for right now. So they just never stop going. So you need to get these skills down. And the most evidence-based way to study and to work on your skills is to do forced recall. Yeah.
I every time people ask me this, I always tell them that, okay, I didn't know it was called active recall or forced recall, but I tell them that when I'm studying, I'll ask myself questions on the way to make sure it's making sense, to force my brain to actively retrieve that material. So
Exactly.
yeah.
That's exactly what you got to do. So you gotta involve yourself actively in your studying. And one thing that I saw all the time in college was that friends would take a textbook and they would literally be writing out, like sentence for sentence what's already in the textbook, or highlighting what's already in the textbook. And that's not active. You can do that without really engaging your brain.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way to engage your brain is just like you said, is to force yourself, to quiz yourself, or force yourself to recall the information. So if you just read something that's like, the mitochondria is a powerhouse of the cell, and you're trying to remember that, you can either read that section and then continue to read a bit afterwards and force yourself to say the mitochondria is what, and force yourself to write it down. Or if you are learning a more sort of complex process like the Krebs cycle, to force yourself to try to draw it out. That's why using something like a whiteboard can be really good.
And I said that as well in one of my study videos. I have a huge whiteboard. I had a huge whiteboard in my apartment in college, and I have a huge whiteboard even now that I write everything out on. And that,
exactly.
Yeah.
The more you write it out, the more you're forcing yourself to teach something. And that's why they say that teaching is so effective, because when you teach something to somebody, it's proving to yourself, it's showing yourself and forcing yourself to really think something all the way through. Come up with other ways to remember things, like building memory palaces, if you've ever heard about that, where I can talk about that in a second. So if you can do these things, you're going to be able to, go into your classes and perform a lot more confidently and do a lot better. I'll mention what a memory palace is now, since I said that I'm related. You imagine in your mind a space that you're very comfortable with. And so for me, what I like to imagine was my childhood home. And what you can do is picture yourself walking through this space and placing objects in that space that you're trying to remember. So I remember doing this with the Krebs cycle, and I can't remember the Krebs cycle right now anymore, but what I would do is I would take something that I need to remember and put it in order as foyer of the house. And maybe I'm trying to remember like CO2. So then I might picture like a soda can, because soda cans are carbonated beverages, and so that might remind me of CO2. So I picture a little soda can sitting in the foyer of my childhood home, and then I walk through the foyer. I see the soda can, and then I turn and go into the living room. And in the living room, maybe the next step in what you're trying to study after CO2 is is oxygen. Then I might remember balloons in the living room. So what you do is you build this palace, and it can be enormous. It can be your childhood home extending into your backyard, into your neighbor's yard, and you can remember, really pretty long chains of. So I can leave it at that for now. I have more tips to go through, but there's a lot of questions here.
Oh, like what's the best way to ask for letters of recommendation from professors?
The best way to ask for letters of recommendation from professors is, no matter how you're going to do it, it's going to feel pretty awkward, kind of like you're asking someone on a date or something like that. But what I suggest is, first of all, who are you going to ask? So you'll want to have at least 2 scientists as your recommenders. So these can be like a science professor from like a biology course or chemistry, or it could be like a lab professor. And so something that I like to suggest to people is, for all of your letters of recommendation, you want it to be somebody that can really speak to who you are as a person, that really knows you. And usually it's not likely that that's the professor that's teaching the big lecture, with 200 or 300 students in there.
Like maybe like a research professor that you worked with?
Exactly. So research professors, and in a classroom setting, maybe someone like a laboratory professor or TA or someone like that. Those sorts of people might be the sort of person that you were able to get some more one-on-one time with. They know what your hometown is. They know why you want to go to medical school, and they can make it a lot more personal. So when I was sending out an email beforehand to sort of coordinate the time to ask the question, just say something vague like, I have a question or a favor to ask. Is there some time that we can meet? And then when we meet, you need to come prepared. So I think it's really good if you can go into that meeting and have together a little packet. And I talk about this in my book, The Physician's Guide, of having a packet that has, first of all, a letter that's just thanking them and saying, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. It's really important for, supporting my future career. And in addition to the letter, to have sort of clear asks. So you could say, this is the date that I need to have this turned in by. These are things that I'm trying to highlight in my application. Is it possible you can maybe mention those things in your application? So you can even help them with sort of writing the letter in a way that helps to suit your application. That helps you out, but it also helps them out, because if they're like, I'm about to write this letter for this person, and I'm just trying to remember like little strands from our conversations, you can help to remind them.
So like, for example, like COVID-19, like for some people, for some schools, you can't like physically see your professor right now. Would you recommend kind of doing the packet thing, but maybe in like an email format, maybe like make like a little PDF and send it over that way?
That would definitely work. I would still suggest you try to have a one-on-one Zoom call or meeting with the professor, just to add that sort of personal touch to it. A couple things that I see on here are questions about grades. So this is one of my favorite things to talk about, because I think one of the most stressful things as a pre-med is what sorts of grades do you need to get, and everyone messes up. Everyone gets that C or D or F, and they're like, oh, can I even make it to medical school anymore? And what is so important to remember is that you are not competing based on your grades. Your grades are just a threshold, and they need to be good enough for you to be considered. But then once you're considerable, nobody cares whether you had a 3.8 versus a 4.0. It's kind of, and that threshold I think is around a 3.7 or 3.6 and above as like a cumulative GPA. And tons of people get into medical school with GPAs lower than that. So it's no big deal. Once you get a very good GPA, you know, if you can try to shoot for something like a 3.7 or 3.8, that's good enough to be considered by just about every medical school in the country. But it's not, you don't need to put in all of that, you know, extra time and stress to really try to make it that perfect 4.0. You're not competing based on your GPA. You're competing based on what you do outside the classroom.
Okay.
So you want to make as much time as you can and as much mental space as you can to be able to do really interesting and active and, you know, impressive extracurricular work, to be doing really impressive research if it's something that you're interested in, to be, you know, doing really good and active volunteering. These are the kinds of things that build a more interesting application and that will increase your chances. Well, medical school is definitely expensive. To answer that first question, so is definitely expensive, and it's something to consider. This is an investment that you're making. Looking at it from a strictly financial perspective, it is not smart to go to medical if you are just looking to have the most money. If you are unable to get any sort of financial support, you can expect to have student loans of $200,000, $300,000, maybe even by the time you guys are in medical school, it might approach even closer to $400,000. One thing that I would suggest is that you should definitely consider your in-state institutions, particularly if you're from states like the states in the South tend to have a lot lower in-state tuition rates.
I went to UF, the University of Florida, and like their medical school is like, I've looked into it. It's compared to other schools I've looked up, it's cheaper, much cheaper.
Yeah. So that's really nice, and that's a major consideration because really the difference between the quality of medical schools is so low.
Someone asked me when they should start studying for the MCAT. I said that most people recommend 3 to 5 months. I say 3 to 5 months. I don't know if you have any.
Yep. So in my book, I say 3 to 6 months, but 3 to 5 months definitely. And in fact, I might even like 3 to 5 months better, because one of my main messages for people is don't start studying too early. Months, maybe even 5 months, like you say, because you want to feel like you're under a time crunch.
Does race matter when applying to medical school?
Yeah. So this is a pretty common question, and actually it's something I talk about in my book as well, is that one of the most important things for medical schools is diversity. So I think it was probably the most common question that I got in the secondary applications is basically something along the lines of, we are a community that strives for diversity and inclusion, and what sort of diversity can you offer to our medical school? And so that's a really important question, because everyone has their own unique life story, and it's so important that you engage with that and that you can, you know, show that you bring that to the medical school, because a medical school is looking for, you know, people that generally represent their patients and population. And so, you know, you can bring diversity on many different levels. One of those can be race, but one of those can also be sort of the culture and the family that you come from as well. So that's something that's really important to engage with. And something that I write about in my book is, you know, one way to show that you are sort of engaging with your roots is to try to link together your background and the diversity that you bring to a program with sort of your clinical interests or your research interests. So it puts together everything in a very sort of clear way, and it's showing that you form the practice of advocating for the very people that you represent, and that's exactly what medical schools look for. All right. So can you just give me a little bit of the background of where you went to school and when you graduated and kind of what your like educational background is?
Okay, so I just graduated from the University of Florida with a Bachelor's of Science in Biology.
Congratulations.
I finished I graduated magna cum laude, but I did a thesis on traumatic brain injury biomarkers, protein biomarkers. And so I was really into I was really into like the neurobiology aspect. I was an undergraduate TA for a science lab.
Let me tell you right now that you're killing it. It really the things are sounding really, really good.
Okay.
And I do this with a good amount of pre-meds, and this isn't always the case.
I shadowed a gynecologic oncologist for 6 months during my third year.
Yeah, so you have all of the raw ingredients to build a really strong application. And so my next question would be if you've given any thought to why you want to be a doctor and specifically what kind of like doctor you could see yourself being. And sorry to put you on the spot with sort of those big questions, but you'll see afterwards it's important.
This is a question I honestly think about a lot. Forgot to mention I have a wig business that I started because of shadowing that gynecologic oncologist. There was a patient that came in and she told me, she was like, oh my gosh, so many women like would love to like be able to get nice wigs and stuff like that. And she was talking to me about it, and I was like, you know what, let me start a business on it. So I started a whole business that I get money from it, and I'm able to donate wigs back to women with alopecia and cancer patients. So I like leading, I like seeing what's going on and then doing my best to try to make a difference, if that makes any sense.
This is amazing. You're giving me a lot of good materials here. So like I'm saying, you have the raw ingredients, and I think what we could work on now is sort of building a narrative, building a story. So one of the easiest ways to start building a narrative is to choose a specialty. So I say this to pre-meds, and they're always like sort of surprised, like, I don't know, I'm not ready to decide yet, but you can relax as a pre-med. Whatever you're going to choose now is going to change. You're going to go into medical school, you're going to do your clerkships, and you're going to see really what each specialty is like, and you're going to probably change your mind. But it really helps to go into your medical school applications and into your interviews with sort of a goal, a specific goal or a vision in mind. So based on what you're talking about, you've mentioned a few different things, both in sort of the neurology area, like neuropsychiatry or neurosurgery, but then you've also mentioned oncology. And so that's another area that you can go as well. And what I encourage you to think about is, if you feel somewhat passionate about either of these specialties or maybe a different one that you haven't mentioned yet, then think about how you can link together these different things that you've done to sort of build a story about how it's made you want to become an oncologist. And what you can do in the meantime, then, if you're looking for what kind of volunteering should I be doing, what kinds of letters of recommendation should I be getting? You can be looking for people that support that narrative. So if you're saying, I'm going to become the world's next best oncologist, then you talk about, your shadowing, you talk about the wigs and the patients that you work with, and you can build a whole really clear personal statement about this. You can, talk about it during your interview day. And, like I said, it's very possible you'll change your mind later on, but it just builds a very clear narrative for your application.
Okay, that's good to know. Wow. Well, the more you know, I never thought of it like that. Honestly, I just kind of did what my heart tells me to do.
Yeah, but but your heart's probably leading you towards things you're naturally interested in. And so, if you can choose a specialty and then start to build a narrative of all these things that link together to go towards that specialty, it makes for a very clear application. Let's begin with saying, first of all, that if anyone wants to connect with me, they can find me on YouTube at Med School Mastery. On Instagram, it's at med_school_mastery. And also I'm on TikTok, and that's where I actually reach most of the pre-meds, and that's where they find most of my videos. And then medschoolmastery.com is where you can find out more about me and can get the book. It's called The Physician's Guide, and it's got all these tips in there that we've gone through about what classes and GPA you shoot for, how to study for the MCAT, how to build a narrative and build a good application. So all of that is there.
Okay, awesome. Well, it was really nice working with you today, Nick, and I feel like I got a lot of information. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this video, that you learned something, and thank you again so much for joining me, Nick, today. I feel like I learned so much, and I'm definitely going to keep in mind trying to build my story. If you guys have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to me via DMs or reach out to Nick. He has so much information, and I hope to see you guys in my next video. Bye, guys.